Hey guys, we're going to be trying something new today. I'm actually going to be reading to you from my brand new book, which is actually 60 years old, called Now We Are Six by A. Milne. And if you know anything about A. Milne, you'll know he wrote Winnie the Pooh. So you can see the cover. Some of the illustrations may look familiar, such as Christopher Robin. And the poem we will be reading today will be The Old Sailor. There once was an old sailor my grandfather knew, who had so many things which he wanted to do, that whenever he thought it was time to begin, he couldn't because of the state he was in. He was shipwrecked and lived on an island for weeks. And he wanted a hat, and he wanted some breeks, and he wanted some nets or a line and some hooks, for the turtles and things which you read of in books. And thinking of this, he remembered a thing which he wanted for water, and that was a spring. And he thought that to talk to he'd look for and keep, if he found it, a goat, or some chickens and sheep. And here are the illustrations, guys. So you can see old sailor sitting alone, and then under the line, and dancing turtle, and no hat. Then because of the weather he wanted a hut, with a door to come in by, which opened and shut, with a jerk which was useful if snakes were about, and a very strong lock to keep savages out. He began on the fish hooks, and when he'd begun, he decided he couldn't because of the sun. So he knew what he ought to begin with, and that was to find or to make a large sun-stopping hat. He was making the hat with some leaves from a tree when he thought, I'm as hot as a body can be, and I've nothing to take for my terrible thirst, so I'll look for a spring, and I'll look for it first. Then he thought as he started, oh dear and oh dear, I'll be lonely tomorrow with nobody here. So he made in his notebook a couple of notes. I must first find some chickens. No, I mean goats. He had just seen a goat, which he knew by the shape, when he thought, but I must have a boat for escape. And you can see him looking out and working. And then the chicken and the goat trying to replace the chicken in the tree. But a boat means a sail, which means needles and thread, so I'd better sit down and make needles instead. He began on a needle, but thought as he worked, that if this was an island where savages lurked, sitting safe in his hut he'd have nothing to fear, whereas now they might suddenly breathe in his ear. So he thought of his hut, and he thought of his boat, and his hat and his breeks, and his chickens and goat, and the hooks for his food, and the spring for his thirst. But he never could think which he ought to do first. And so in the end he did nothing at all, but basked on the shingle wrapped up in a shawl. And I think it was dreadful the way he behaved. He did nothing but basking until he was saved. And then we can see the turtle dancing. He's chilling with the turtle, trying to decide. He's laying down, being rescued. And I'm assuming they're dancing in jubilee of his celebration of being rescued because they found him. And that was The Old Sailor by A. Milne. And that was only 3 minutes and 51 seconds. So I'm actually going to read another poem because I can, and I like to read out loud sometimes. Not very often. Actually, I do like this one, because it's about a beetle. Oh no! You know what's even better than that one? Good Girl Jane. Oh dear, which one is it? This next one is The Good Little Girl. It's funny how often they say to me, Jane, have you been a good girl? Have you been a good girl? And when they have said it, they say it again. Have you been a good girl? Have you been a good girl? I go to a party, I go out to tea, I go to an aunt for a week at the sea. I come back from school or from playing a game. Wherever I come from, it's always the same. Well, Have you been a good girl, Jane? It's always the end of the loveliest day. Have you been a good girl? Have you been a good girl? I went to the zoo and they wanted to say, have you been a good girl? Have you been a good girl? Well, what did they think I went there to do, and why should I want to be bad at the zoo? And should I be likely to say if I had? And that's why it's funny of Mummy and Dad. This asking and asking in case I was bad. Well, have you been a good girl, Jane? Let me see. Jane on this page. And in the grass. And at the zoo, feeding the animals despite the no feeding animal sign. So Jane was not a good girl. But this is now 6 minutes long. So I bid you adieu. Tell me if you liked it. Like I said, trying new things. This is actually my new favorite book. So, cool. And if you have any suggestions of things I can read, let me know. Love you guys.